Hey, so we're back with Pet in chapter 7. Jam went down to breakfast in the morning as if the skin of her life was normal, as if it hadn't bubbled and warped and fallen off. Pet was a loud secret in her, a wrong note of the usual harmony in her house, making it discordant, guilty. She could feel the wrongness warbling through the floorboards. It made her want to finish the hunt quickly, so the secret would no longer be a secret, so she could return to how it all used to be. Deep inside her, Jam wasn't sure that was even possible, but she held on to the hope anyway. You doing okay, love? Aloe asked across the breakfast table. And Jam started, her forks clattering against the plate. She'd been so in her head, his voice was a surprise. His concerned face, a foreign arrangement of skin and muscle. Her mother was still upstairs. I'm fine, she signed. She wished he and Bitter would stop asking her how she was, if she was mad at them. Their worry felt like it was a blanket that kept trying to be thrown over her shoulders. She kept having to shrug it off. They were trying to talk to Jam about, they had tried to talk to Jam about Pet, but she didn't want to. And her parents weren't the type of people to force her to open up. So they let her walk away from the conversation each time. And Jam pretended as if she didn't see the synchronized disappointment flashing over their faces. It built a stone of guilt in her chest, and Jam added to the pile it had been forming there since she told Pet to stay. The best thing to do was to focus on the hunt and not on her parents or the lies she was telling them with her silence. She ate breakfast quickly, then retreated to the bathroom to pee and was washing her hands when Pet appeared. Jam felt it gathering in the air before its body showed up. As she watched it appear bit by bit, fur and feathers and horns like dried blood. Hey, she said. Pet nodded at her and crouched against the wall next to the shower, its body aggressively eclipsing the rest of the bathroom. It watched her through the mirror, its mouth hanging open, smoke puffing out in short breaths. How was your night? Jam asked, wondering where it spent the time away, but not wanting to ask. Busy. A hunt takes preparation. Readying for the readiness, it replied. The bathroom door slid open and Bitter walked in, tying a scarf around her head. Jam froze, with her hands tangled in a towel, her heartbeat spiking to a blur. Don't worry, Pet said. She can't see me. Morning, sweetness. Bitter dropped a kiss on Jam's forehead and slid the mirror aside to show the shelves behind. Just looking for my face serum. You seen it? Jam shook her head and Bitter hummed to herself, looked around the bathroom. Jam watched her with wide eyes. There were two bathrooms in that moment, lying on top of each other. It was the room in Bitter's eyes, with the deep tub against one wall, a stack of books lying next to it, the shower with its patterned tiles and clear doors, the small bottle of serum sitting on the shelf inside. Bitter saw it and let out a pleased ah as she went toward the shower. Jam stared as her mother moved through the second bathroom, the one with Pet in it. Bitter passed through the creature's body as if nothing but gold and feathered fog. She touched Jam's cheek and gave her a soft, worried look before leaving with the serum, and Jam sagged with relief as soon as the door slid closed. This is too stressful, she told Pet. I just need it to be over. A hunt takes as long as the hunt takes, I replied. I think you should tell the boy about me. Jam leaned against the sink and folded her arms. Tell who? Redemption? Yes. This keeping of a secret is not a good thing to keep. You are keeping too many, and they do not fit inside your heart. They will keep spaces between you and your humans. I didn't know you were so concerned about me or my humans. Pet tilted its chin up. You need the boy to trust you, it said. Secrets do not help trust. Do not help the hunt, which needs his trust. Ah, Jan tightened her mouth. It's the hunt you're worried about, of course. It's always the hunt, little girl. She scuffed the floor with her foot. I don't think we should tell him. It's better if we just stick to the original plan. Pet shook his head at her. Do you smell your own fears? It asked. They are so strong when they leak from you. Jan stared at the floor. She hated being accused of fear, of moving with fear. It didn't matter that she really was scared, but she just didn't want to be seen as that, someone who was maybe a coward. Part of why she didn't want to tell Redemption about Pet because it was scary to think about how he might react. If he freaked out, he'd be mad that she hadn't told him earlier. Or it was even harder to think about him, of telling him why Pet was there and that his house was the beginning, a monster's lair, the starting den. She had such a difficult time herself accepting that there could be a monster in his family. How could he take it? But then again, if he was the one being hurt, wouldn't he already know that? Jam imagined Redemption being furious for having a secret discovered and just imagining it was painful because then it would mean that he had a secret that he hadn't shared with her. He couldn't be mad at her for not telling him about Pet, though, in that case. Could one secret cancel out the other? But also, there was a small chance that Redemption didn't even know he was being hurt. Maybe he thought whatever was happening was okay. Maybe the monster had lied that well to him, and she would have to be the one to break the news that nothing of it should be happening. What if he didn't believe her? What if there was a choice between her and the monster, and he called her a liar or said that she was being crazy and making the whole Pet thing up? And when he went to, and then he went and chose the monster. What if Pet reached out with both its feathered arms and pulled her against his torso? You're spiraling, it said. Just breathe, little girl. Slow and deep. Breathe in the air, little human. Stop thinking. Jam closed her eyes, feeling its warm fur through the cotton of her t-shirt, the faint coolness of its gold-feathered arms, and the distinct chilliness of her mother's hands stitched to its wrists. A gradation of temperature falling off the extremities. Why do you have a pulse? She asked, trying to push her anxiety about Redemption away. Because I have a body, Pet answered. So does that mean you have a heart? Something like that. Not the way you humans talk about the abstract one, but I have an organ that moves fluids around in me. Blood? No, my body isn't from this world. I am made of things you have no names for. Jam nodded. Her own pulse had settled. The wildfire beating of wings in her head had calmed down a little. I think I'm okay now, she said. Pet released her and drew back a foot or two, watching her as she composed herself. Jam looked at her reflection, backdropped by the creature, then wiped her hands over her face, wanting to tell him, she said. I want to tell him, she said, but I'm scared he won't believe me about any of it. I will show myself to him, Pet said. It is not hard to believe me. It is not hard to believe me when I am before you. Jam thought about her parents. I don't know about that, she said. Your parents are adult humans, Pet replied, pulling on the thought behind her words. Younger ones have fewer blocks about belief. It was disconcerting when Pet dipped in and out of her head. Jam wondered if he was reading her thoughts or if that counted as an invasion of privacy. Pet scoffed. I respect your privacy, it said. I am only in the part of your head and only part of your humans. Your heads are always open. If you're uncomfortable, you can try to ignore your head. Jam thought about it, then shrugged. He didn't mind so much. It was actually kind of comforting to have Pet there, like she wasn't alone all the time. You need intimacy to be a unit, and this seamless knowing Pet had of her made up for a little bit how much she missed the closeness she used to share with her parents. Don't go into Redemption's head, though, she warned. Pet angled its face. The hunter only looks into the head of the other hunter, it said. We are connected, little girl. I would not enter the thoughts of any other human. Oh, okay, good. Tell the boy when you see him today, it continued. I will show myself, and he will assist us in the hunt. Jam made a hesitant face. I'm not sure I want to tell him everything, she said. Everything is many things, Pet replied. What would you like him to know? Jam twisted her fingers together. It's fine if we show you to him, she said, and we can tell him you're here to haunt a monster, but I don't want him to know it's in his house. Pet nodded and didn't say anything. Jam wondered what it was thinking. If it thought that leaving out that small piece of information counted as a lie. Maybe her plan was messed up. But Jam hoped that once Redemption got over the shock of seeing Pet, he would be excited about looking for a monster. There was no way that excitement would remain if it became personal, if he knew they were hunting in his house. It was better for now if Redemption thought he was saving someone else. Everyone's braver when they think they're a hero. And something along the way, things would click for him and he would realize or recognize what was going on and that the monster was in his house. And Jam wouldn't have to be the one to tell him. It made her chest feel lighter, the thought of avoiding the whole ugly conversation. but doubt whispered through her like smoke seeping under a closed door. What then? Pet asked. You're keeping the secret forever? You'll never tell him you knew the monster was in his house all along? Jam smothered the doubt silent. It was important. What was important was finding the monster. It didn't matter how or what pieces of information fell through the cracks in the meantime. All that mattered was making sure that redemption was safe. Pet cleared his throat. I'm going to go now, it announced. Call for me when the boy is here and you're ready to tell him your halfway truths. Jam glared at it, ready to snap a retort. The pet laughed before her thoughts could form shape. The air was empty and she was alone in the bathroom. It took Jam all morning to figure out where to reveal Pet to redemption. Her room was too small. Pet was scarier in cramped spaces if you weren't used to its size. Anywhere outside was too risky, not because anyone else would see Pet, because there was definitely see Redemption's reaction if he had a bad one. Explaining why her best friend was freaking out at empty air seemed like a conversation Jam didn't want to have with her neighbors. In the end, she decided in her mother's studio, because the room was large and Pet looked to fit what belonged there as much as it could belong anywhere in this world. Bitter was at yoga and Aloe was at work, so she had a little time. Jam went to the studio and looked up at the canvas that was laying on the floor, ripped up and empty. Bitter hadn't been painting since Pet showed up. She said she needed a break, and both Aloe and Jam understood completely. It must have felt a lot like being betrayed by your own work, Jam thought, to have it come to life and then argue with them, bring stories of monster and its smoky mouth, awaken the past her parents thought they had escaped. She wouldn't have wanted to paint for a while either if she was bitter. And maybe the canvas would help to convince redemption. Not only that she could tell the story of that night, but perhaps it could help even looking as it did, just a torn and empty canvas edged in painted smoke. But if Pet stood next to it, the colors would match, right down to the splatters of paint on the floor around the canvas. You could see they went together. Redemption would look at it, and he would believe. Jam wasn't even sure what she meant by believe, that Redemption would believe the story she was about to tell him, that he would believe in Pet. It was a hard question in its existence once it showed up in all of its clear, mighty bulk. Or would he believe in monsters? That felt more unclear. Jam wasn't sure how deeply Redemption bought the Lucille line that there were no more monsters. She knew he agreed that there was a distinction between no more monsters and no free monsters, but she didn't know if he would believe that there was a loose monster that needed to be hunted down. Even her parents hadn't believed that, and they knew about monsters. They'd grown up with monsters. Jam felt even more sure that her decision not to tell Redemption the monster was in his house was the right move. It was enough to show him Pet and tell him about the hunt. If they told him too much, he might leave, he might not want to hunt with her, and she and Pet would have a much thinner chance of finding the monster in the house without him. I'm doing the right thing, she said aloud to the empty studio. No one was there to hear. The paintings and sculptures said nothing back. Redemption was on his way already. Jam had told him to meet her in the studio. He probably thought she was going to show him some of Bitter's work, which was funny because in a way she was. There had been a brief spell when Redemption was interested in painting and had spent a few weeks hanging out with Bitter in the studio. In the end, he decided he liked fighting more. It was a shame, Bitter had said. His hands were actually good at making things other than bruises and breaks. Jam searched for Pet, even though he had told her it would only come when she called. She cast wide through the air the same way she felt through the house, but it all came up empty. It looked like it was just going to be her alone with Redemption, at least at first. That was probably for the best, because once Pet came pouring through nothingness, Redemption's life would change as certainly as Jam's had. It was her nervous, no one outside this house has ever seen Pet. The family's reality had expanded when Pet was added to it, but everyone else lived in that other world, and no one where creatures from other realms didn't exist. She was bringing Redemption over to that side, colliding the two worlds, and the weight of what she was about to do made the top of her head float away, even as she heard the front door open downstairs and Redemption's voice calling a greeting as he entered. Jam puffed out a hard breath and focused on the soles of her bare feet, pressing them into the wood of the floor. uneven with age and paint and rough varnish. It's going to be okay, she told herself. It's going to be fine. Part of her just wanted to leave, to run away inside her head, disassociate deeper than anyone could find. But Jam knew she had to stay. The mission needed her. The hunt needed her. She bent over and closed her eyes, taking deep breaths to center herself. And she didn't notice that Redemption had entered the studio until he was taking hold of her shoulders gently. Jam, you okay? She straightened herself up and tried to inject a calm under the skin of her face, and she looked at him and nodded. Except Redemption had been her friend for too long, and he could tell she was pretending. I got you, he said, shifting to stand in front of her, toes to toes, his palms still warm against her shoulders. It's okay. You're here. You're real. He leaned his forehead against her, and Jam closed her eyes, trying not to cry. He was always so good at taking care of her, and now it felt like her turn to protect him, to do the right thing and make him feel safe. But Jam wasn't sure if she was messing it up already. It's okay, he said again, and they stood like that for a while, until Jam settled back into her skin. She took a deep breath and stepped back a little. Thanks, she said. Anytime. You sure you're good? Yeah, she smiled to show she was telling the truth this time. Then took his hand and led him to the overstuffed orange couch in the corner, under a row of hanging ferns. The two of them pushed aside sketchbooks and worn velvet cushions to make room, then settled down on it. To her surprise, she was eager to tell him what was going on. It had been hard doing all this without her best friend. This is going to sound wild, she warned him. I'm ready, he said, steady and intent. Redemption had always loved a good story. The wilder, the better. Jam took one of his hands in her and started telling him everything from the beginning, from Bitter making the painting and what Aloe had said and how it wanted to be real, to her sneaking in and cutting herself on the canvas, coming back to find Pet emerging, watching Redemption's face as she spoke. It remained the same as it always did, gentle and open and paying attention. He didn't recoil in disbelief when she described Pet. Instead, he leaned forward, his eyebrows pulling together as he listened even harder, as if he didn't want to miss even a fraction of a detail. It had been a long time since Jam had voiced this much for this long, and she could see Redemption was taking that seriously. It was entirely possible that he was thinking she was out of her mind, but at least he was listening. Jam's voice faltered, and she told him about Pet's mission, the hunt for a monster in Lucille. For a second, the truth wanted to wing out of her mouth. She clipped it fiercely. Now wasn't the time, but she could still feel that faint stone of guilt in her chest as she continued with the story. How could it feel both right and wrong not to tell him about the monster is in his house? Anyway, she finished. That's what's been going on, and we need to take a short break. Okay, we're back. Anyway, she finished. That's what's been going on. And that's why I wanted to go to the library today, so we can look up how to figure out what a monster looks like. But Pet wanted me to tell you everything first. I mean, I wanted to tell you too, but I was scared, she shrugged. Now you know. Redemption leaned back against the pile of cushions, staring at her wide-eyed. Whoa, he said. I want to ask if you're for real, but I already know you are. So, wow, just give me a second, yeah? Sure, she replied. It's a lot to think about. Redemption threw up his hands. It's unreal. Jam gave a short laugh. Trust me, I know. I mean, I can't even imagine. He shook his head in awe. You must have completely freaked out. Jam gave him a small smile, and a shaky hope built inside her. You believe me? Redemption frowned and sat forward to take her hand. Jam, of course I believe you, he said, searching her eyes with his. You would never lie to me. Ha, Pet said in her head, its voice showing up with an abrupt and unbalancing suddenness. He's so confident in you, yes? Shut up, Jam replied. I didn't call you yet. Pet ignored her spikiness. You were taking too long. It paused. It's not too late to tell him, you know, it added. I know, she answered. And she did. Jam had seen enough times in books and movies where one person had a chance to be honest, a window of an opening that closed with the silence intact. She knew that it would come back and blow up, and for worse, all that window in which she could do something let's try that again. She knew it would come back and blow up and be worse for that window in which something could have been said. And she knew she was right at that moment inside that window. Redemption was looking at her with those black, trusting eyes of his eyebrows thick and messy above them. Jam could tell the rest of the message Pet had arrived with. She could tell Redemption all of it right now, and it would probably be fine. But her friend had believed so easily, and everything was going as well as it was. Redemption was even talking now, chattering as if Pet were really serious about showing itself, as if he was going to be able to see it. He seemed excited about the whole thing, and Jam couldn't bring herself to break that. The story, the magic of the creature spilling out of the painting, she couldn't contaminate it with involving his house, his family. Pet's version of the story had been breaking her heart since she heard it. She wanted to wait a little more before breaking Redemption's. Am I a terrible person? She asked Pet. There's no such thing, it replied. There's only what you do. I know what I mean. Is what I'm doing terrible, not telling him? You humans and your binaries, he said. It's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just a thing. Okay, but for real though, Redemption would say, it's going to show up right here, like right now. Jam couldn't help but smile at his enthusiasm. It was so different from her fears. Yeah, when I call it. Whoa, okay. He arranged himself on the couch and it took a couple breaths to prepare. And you said it's huge, right? Like massive? Yeah, it's pretty big and a little scary, especially because it doesn't have eyes. It takes some getting used to, and the claws and the horns and the menacing sense of destruction it tends to drag along with it, which she didn't add. I heard that, Pet said. Jam almost rolled her eyes. Whatever, just show up already. She felt the air start to weigh down in response, and she looked at Redemption. I'm calling it now, okay? I'm ready, he said, his eyes bright. Good, Jam said. It's coming. Okay, so we're about to have a huge change in the story as Redemption meets Pet.